guys, welcome back to Unleashed. And if you forgot to move your clock ahead this past weekend, you're probably wondering why you're late for everything. You know, to me, the time change just means I get an extra hour of daylight. You know, we're closer to the first day of spring, which means we are that much closer to spring turkey season, which I am all for. And man, there is nothing like that first morning gobble, you know, on the roost. You know, your blood gets going, your adrenaline goes up, your focus sharpens. You know, you're listening to every single sound like your life depends on it. And it's so funny because, you know, like during deer season, we're being so quiet with noise. And it's not that much in like with turkey, because they're not alerted as much by that as they obviously are when they see movement. But anyhow, you know, I love it. I love it when you get a couple of like longbeards answering you. And, you know, they're just hammering back and forth, you know, and when they start to close the distance, I love how your heart feels like it's going to beat like right out of your chest. I think the only thing more intense is maybe when you get a bull elk, you know, he's bugling back to you, and you can start to hear him, you know, rake his antlers, you know, on trees and stuff. And then you see the glow of his antlers hitting that morning sun, maybe as he's coming up the ridge to check you out. And those are the moments, I'm telling you, that I feel the most alive. There's nothing like being out there in the mountains, weapon in hand, and just watching everything come to life. It's crazy amazing. You know, I love hunting turkeys. I love hunting elk. I love hunting whitetails. That's, you know, my biggest thing is whitetails. But there's like a whole nother level of adrenaline. You know, when you are hunting bear. You know, bear is just different. When you're in their country, it's a different feeling than you get when you're hunting those other things I just talked about. You know, and when you're out there, when you're hunting bear, you're constantly kind of looking over your shoulder. You know, and here's the thing: if you're out there and you get into a tiff with a bear, if you don't have your weapon with you, you know, 100% of the time, he's going to win. I mean, so it's intense, because a lot of times when I'm out there, maybe I'm tracking an animal or something, maybe it was for a buddy or something, and it can get pretty iffy because you have no idea where a wounded animal might be, lying somewhere, and we'll talk about that in just a second. It gets pretty hairy. There's 4 times that I have had bear encounters just in Colorado alone. I've had them other places where 3 of the 4 bears ended up hanging on somebody's wall, actually my wall. But the one that lived, that I mentioned, the 3 out of the 4, was when I was filming over the shoulder of my buddy Brent, and I think it was 2016. And I was in Colorado, maybe, 3 hours from Denver or something, back in the mountains. And there was this big blonde phase black bear. Now say that twice fast. Big blonde phase black bear. And we were on like this 8-foot wide path, and we're going down this thing. We're actually headed back to hunt elk. I think it was in an afternoon for a hunt, and this bear turns right onto this 8-foot wide path we're walking on, and he's coming straight at us at about 15 yards. He has no clue that we're walking on this path, and it totally caught us off guard. You know, we heard him right before he stepped out of the oak scrub, and we thought it was an elk coming through. And the good thing was that we had the sun at our backs, which meant, you know, it was in the bear's eyes, which is a good thing. And we had the wind in our face, which meant that the bear wasn't picking up our scent. And that's great. But when they're that close and you spook one, you know, it can become like flight or fight, right? For the bear, not just us. You know, we were both ducked down. When we saw him come out, we both ducked down as low as we could. I guess the sun blinded him. He never saw us kind of duck down. I've got the camera over his shoulder. He's got his bow. And as soon as the bear caught on to us, he turned to head back into the oak scrub, or the scrub oak, when Brandon lets this arrow fly. And the problem was that the angle when he turned so quickly, and the speed at which he turned, made the arrow go too far back. I think we gave it 30 or 40 minutes, and we stepped off the path about 20 yards to see if we could tell which way the bear had gone, when we saw the arrow just lying there on the ground, all covered in blood. And we looked at this pine tree right there, and maybe 5 feet up on this pine tree, he had stood up, and he was rubbing his back on this pine tree to pull the arrow out. That's exactly what he did. And we slow tracked that bear for probably 2 to 3 hours. I think there was 3 of us back in there looking for this bear. Until finally one of the guys saw it about a quarter of a mile away going onto a property across the valley that we didn't have access to. And at one point, I came across this muddy area as I was getting down toward the bottom where the bear had actually laid down in mud and rolled around in it to help cover the wound up. They're smart. And when you're like in this thick stuff and you're crawling around on your hands and knees, it's spooky. It really is, because it's different than tracking a wounded deer, right? I think one time in my life, I actually had a buck charge me that my buddy had shot with an arrow, but it was kind of pinned in and it couldn't go anywhere except trying. I think it was just trying to get around me. But another year in that same area, we had just come back from a morning hunt when my buddy, again, I was hunting with Brandon this time again, he spotted this nice black bear. I think it was about 175, 180 yards away. And the funny thing is, we were getting changed. We're both in our underwear, getting out of our camo, trying to get some other clothes back on. And all of a sudden, he sees this thing, grabs his 7mm, and he lets a round fly. And he hit the bear hard, right? But we didn't see the bear go down because it was real close to this scrub oak stuff. So we gave it 30 or 40 minutes. And then, we kind of walked down to this large patch of this scrub oak. And it's like 8 feet tall. You can't see over it. It's above your head. It's kind of like alder bushes up in Alaska. Maybe not quite as thick stemmed, but it's still really, really thick trying to get through it. And the problem was the bear, when it was hit, it drops down into this small ravine, but it never exited the area because we could see all around it. We could tell if the bear would have come out on any side. So we knew the bear was still inside the small ravine. And when I say it was a small ravine, I'm talking about like 50 to 75 yards in any direction. So we gave it about another hour, and then I entered this patch of this scrub oak with only a 45, and it was actually Brandon's handgun. And so, because it was too long to walk down in there with a rifle if you're searching and trying to be paying attention at the same time. I felt like one of those tunnel rats in Vietnam. I just said, hey, give me your 45, and so I go down into this stuff. 30 minutes later, I'm going as slow as I can and watching in front of me. I locate the wounded bear, still alive. And what had happened was it was a liver hit, so I knew it was probably going to take maybe 4 hours or so. And it had been a couple of hours already. But the bear is laying on his side. And I didn't get too close. I could see it. I thought, I'll be quiet. I'll back out of here. So I go back to the top of the ravine. I get Brandon, tell him I found the bear. Get your 7mm, come with me. And once we got within about 12 feet of the bear, this thing is just laying on its side, kind of with its head looking back at us. And I said, I told him, I said, man, just shoot him right between the shoulders, down through the spine, and it'll go right down through the heart. And he looks at me and he says, yeah, but what if it jumps up? And I whispered back, hey, if it was going to jump up, it would have already been on its feet, right? When you know it, as soon as he shoots the bear, it jumps up and faces us. So much from my guiding expertise. He takes another round, shoots it into the bear, and that was that. It was over. When the thing stands up, he drops it. And luckily, the thing falls 20 yards off the dirt road, which we came in on, which made it for a really easy drag. And then there was another, same area, all within a mile of each other. You remember the story, if you've listened enough to my podcast, there was a bear blind that I was hunting on the last day of an elk hunt, that God told me to take my rifle with me that day, not just my bow. And I did have a bear tag, but I wasn't looking for bear. And on my trip to that bear blind in the dark, God changes my path 3 times. And if you know the story, you can go back and listen to the episode about that. You'll see the picture of the bear on the episode. That's how you know what it was. The bear has torn my blind apart when I've gotten there. I get in, I'm trying to fix the thing, and the bear comes back at me, and I have to drop it with my 30-06, not my bow. And again, God had told me, take your gun, don't worry about your bow. Like, really, this is crazy. And that was a nuts-looking bear. Even the DNR, they thought that it had been crossbreeding with grizzlies because they had seen some of that. That's why it was so aggressive. And then there was another time about 2 or 3 years after that episode with that one I just talked about, where my buddy Tim was with me and we were elk hunting. And I had shot a bear at about 32 yards. And the bear spun around and full charges me. And I'm standing again in this scrub oak, and I've got on like leafy camo. And this thing makes a beeline, but I just don't move. I'm still have my bow up like I was in the draw position, and I haven't let my arm down like my draw hand either. And the bear goes within 3 feet of me, just blows right beside me. He had no idea where I was. He couldn't smell me, had the right wind. But it was crazy because that bear, it cleared something that was probably about 12 feet long and about 4 feet high in one leap. As soon as it passes me, there's like this big pile of stuff back in the woods. And I mean, this thing can jump. I had no idea they could move this fast and jump this high. Thing, it takes off. Now it's getting dark out. So Tim comes walking down to me, and he had heard the shot. And I stopped the bear. I go, man, stop the bear. And then I went ahead and shot him. So Tim comes down, and he's like, hey, how big was the elk? He figures it was an elk. And I said, dude, it wasn't an elk. I said, it was a bear. And he sees my arrow sitting about 8 feet in front of me. He goes, you shot him at 8 feet? I said, no. I said, I shot him at 32 yards. And then he can see the path where the blood is coming right at me. He goes, dude, that thing about ran you over. I said, he was 3 feet from me. So now it's dark, because we have to let the bear go in, it's in and expire and all this stuff. So we've got our headlamps, and I think I had a 9mm. I didn't have like a 44 like I do in Alaska. But we're walking back through this, and we're going down into this deep ravine, not too far, just around the side of the mountain from where that last ravine was I talked about. And we get really close, and it's spooky. Like I said, when you're down low to the ground in the dark, and you're tracking, something that can tear you apart on the count of one, it really is spooky. So we get maybe 15 yards away from this bear, and I can hear it. We looked at each other and said, he's dying right now. He said, yeah, but it could take 30 minutes. He said, let's not push this. I wanted to go in and get it, right? This is my bear. That's that kind of a hunter thing. But this was a time when I needed someone to speak into me and be smart. He says, listen, I got my Onyx here. Let's mark the location. Let's back out. We know where it is. We'll come in a different way tomorrow, so we don't have to go as far. He said, I just think we'd be wise to let this thing expire, not try to push it. That's the power of having two people, as iron sharpens iron. When someone's thoughts are gone awry, the other person can help keep them on track, to ask the right questions to help you be thinking straight. So when you think about all these things I just talked about, what did all these situations have in common? Well, one thing was fear, because what a bear is capable of. You've heard my bear stories on here. You've probably seen movies, maybe interviews on YouTube, read books, where bear attacks have happened, and they really are scary. Period. And a wounded bear, that is just even scarier. I filmed brown bears at 10 yards, and they were fine. They're catching salmon, whatever, they're fine. But I've had, a grizz at 50 yards that didn't like being filmed, didn't like me being there, and he came running up the river to let me know. He pushed me clear off the water back into the woods about 20 yards away, rocking his head back and forth, popping his teeth. I've got my 44 pointed at him. I'm talking to him, and the bear didn't listen real well. And I've been camped right across the river in Alaska near Cooper's Landing, when you're going down the Kenai Peninsula. And I had a lady get part of her scalp, removed by a grizz, while I was camped on the other side of the river. She was only a couple hundred yards away. They're just spooky. I'm sitting here right now in my home office recording this, and I've got a bear rug. I've got actually a couple of them laying here. But I was trying to figure out, I was doing a workout because my workout room was connected onto my podcast studio. And as I was kind of doing both, I was trying to figure out, where to hang this one bear rug that I've got. And I like to listen to podcasts when I'm working out, not my own, but I love listening to stuff like I'm talking to you about. And there was an Alaskan guide who was telling the story of a bear attack, and he had been tracking a moose that his client had shot with, I think it was a muzzle loader, and it was a bad shot. And I think the client made a couple bad shots, hitting it, gut shots both time. So they have to come back the next day. The client, I think he wasn't feeling good, or he hurt his knee or something, and he didn't want to make the trip. So the pilot, they locate with another guide. They fly around. They find where this thing is. He goes back in on foot, and he makes the trip by himself to get to where this moose was. But the problem was he's going through all this thick stuff, just like I was talking about. And when he comes up and he picks his head out from going underneath this one log, he sees a huge dirt pile, and there's a brown bear sitting on this thing, or a grizz. I'm not sure if it was a brown or grizz. I'm not sure what part of Alaska it was in, but it was big. And it's sitting on top of this kill pile that it's got, and full charges, the guide. And again, on the count of one, he's got to raise his rifle. I don't remember what the rifle was he had, but he just has to, let that bullet fly. 3 feet of flame comes out the end of the barrel. And, he raises it, fires instinctively, hits the bear, not only in the head, but the round travels through that head and takes out the bear's spine. I mean, that's about as perfect a shot, If you had time to even place the shot, you couldn't have done it any better. But it happened. And it was his instincts, that took over. He knew the weapon he had. He knew in some of these circumstances, it's like driving a car. When do you hit the brake? When do you hit the gas? When do you put on your signal? My youngest right now is learning how to drive. I took her out last night. And at first there's a little bit of confusion, when to have, your foot on the gas or the brake, or all the things that are coming together. And this is why when you are out with someone who knows you well, that knows your reactions, that knows your amount of training that you've got, right? They know how to be able to handle situations with you, what you're capable of, what you might need help with. Now, this guide knew that there were big bears in this area. And he knows how well that they can smell, a wounded or dead animal. And the chances of a bear already being on that moose that he was after was a high probability. He knew this. But after skinning out the bear, I think he even left the claws or the paws or whatever. He was trying to hurry because it was going to be getting dark. And so he's trying to salvage, what he can, what's left of the moose. So he's got the bear rug on his back. He's got the head and the antlers. He's got 200 pounds of stuff, on his backpack. He has to lay on the ground and get in the push-up, position, kind of roll over and then stand up that way. So he's got all this game on his back, and he's headed back to the cabin to where the client, stayed. Wasn't feeling good, I guess. But when he starts to go on this one ridge, before he gets to the cabin, he sees this cow moose that is being chased by a large bull. And when that moose sees him walking with those big antlers on his back, it immediately thinks he's another moose, turns towards him, and thinking he was another challenger, the moose starts posturing, and rocking his head back and forth, like he's ready to fight. So the guy grabs his rifle, knowing that, again, this might not end well, pulls his rifle up, and fires a shot at the rack, hits the rack, spins the moose away from him, and that was all it took for this thing to disengage from the confrontation. But again, he had something happen. He had to be ready. When I heard this, I thought it was kind of funny because when the guy gets back to camp, the client who didn't want to help go get the animal because he wasn't feeling well, he asks the guide after he's gone through all this stuff. He goes, "Hey, what's for dinner?" And the guide responds with, "Whatever you're fixing." There's times when I've had guys with me when I've tracked wounded bears, and there have been times that, things have happened so fast that really all you can do is use your instincts. It's what you have trained for, but you have to train. You have to have the right weapon. You have to practice with it. There's even times like with my bow, I'll go out and do jumping jacks or push-ups before I take the shot at my target, because I want to simulate what it's going to be like when my heart gets racing. And I have young kids do that sometimes. Because if you don't train for those kind of situations, and you have something really spooky like the bears happening or a moose, if you don't train, you're pretty much up a creek without a paddle. And you've got one shot at getting it right. It's different than whitetail. It's different than turkey. When you have deadly game like this, whether it's Alaska or Africa, you really do have one shot at getting it right, because that second mistake will kill you. And I'll never forget the time when Brandon and I were hunting about 150 yards apart. And this was in Colorado, again, real kind of close in the same unit. And he texts me. We're about, like I said, 150 yards apart. I'm way down the hill from him. It was pretty steep. And he's got a large sow, and she's circling him. She's popping her teeth. He makes his presence known to the bear. He's waving his arms. He's yelling at the bear. The bear's not the least bit intimidated and keeps circling him, staring at him. And this really gets Brandon nervous. So I get this text from him, and he says, dude, I'm bugging out. He says, I'm heading back to camp. He goes, this bear is making me really nervous. Well, the reason the bear was circling him and checking him out was what he didn't know was that her cub had run down to where I was. Didn't know I was there. And this cub is sitting 10 feet away from me while the sow is circling him, and it begins to cry for mom. And it's just letting out this loud cry. Well, as soon as the cub starts calling for its mom, the sow disengages from Brandon, comes crashing down through. Brandon takes off the other way. He has no idea that this cub is down there and where the bear had gone. So here comes this sow. She comes crashing through the brush. She's now broadside to me at 10 feet with her cub. You never want to get around a bear with a cub, especially at 10 feet. But I'm telling you, I did not move. I had the wind in my favor. It was right before the sun was about to go down. And the way that the thermals were going, they weren't kind of going up and going on the wind. They're kind of going down toward my feet and blowing back behind me. Perfect. And as soon as this cub and the sow are out of my eyesight, I bugged out. I was gone. But there's a huge difference between being with another hunter who's got your back and is prepared for whatever happens, and going it alone, especially going it alone if you don't have a weapon or you don't know how to use it. You know, the lie that we as men can buy into is, real men can handle things alone, right? I got this. But the truth is, even warriors have to have brothers, someone who's got their six, someone who's got their back. And one thing that I hope you took away from these bear stories that I was sharing with you in this podcast is that it's important to have men in your life who really know you, that have walked with you, that have your back no matter what. There's a few biblical examples as I was kind of looking for the podcast about men who walked together. David, had Jonathan. Moses, right? He's got Aaron. He doesn't want to go to Pharaoh and do the speaking. God gives him Aaron. Jesus, how did he send out the disciples? He sends them out 2 by 2. He didn't send them out alone. And you've heard me talk about my band of brothers on the podcast. You just heard some of them that I was talking about on here. They're a part of that group. And I can't tell you how many times they've had my back, not just in the woods or like the shipwreck when we were off the coast of Alaska. Maybe you've heard that podcast. But I'm talking about in everyday life, when things really do get tough. I called my buddy Tim, who was, when that bear charged me and came within 3 feet of me, that's who I was talking about. Just 2 days ago, I was dealing with a situation that caused my emotions to get pretty fired up. And, I've been there for him when he's had some struggles as well. And sometimes you need to have someone that you can call when you need to be talked off the ledge, right? Maybe we are talking about a physical ledge. Maybe you're thinking of ending it. And you really do need someone, because that's the worst decision you can ever make. Because you have incredible worth and value, but the enemy is trying to distract you by attacks that cause fear, worry, doubt, shame, all this stuff. And that's why I always talk about identity. If you're in that position, you need to have someone with you that can remind you of who you really are. That there's nothing that you can do or say that can make God love you more by doing everything right. And there's nothing that can make God love you more if you do everything less. That's the beauty of grace for the believer. When things around you go south and are creating a lot of bad thoughts, it's that familiar voice that you've been alongside in your journey, that you've done battle with, that can help you pause, think through things, and then make the best decision. Remember that stop, drop, and roll? It's kind of like more like maybe stop, pause, and pray. Because who do we need to be going to first? We have men in our life, and it's great to have them, but they're there to help us redirect. What are we thinking, and who are we going to with the issue? It was Tim that was walking beside me the night we came upon that wounded bear, like I said, in the dark, and we tracked a number of bears together, 4 or 5 different ones. When I wanted to push through to get to the bear, cooler heads prevailed. Tim encouraged me to mark the spot on his Onyx. We come back the next morning with another buddy. This is kind of funny. And we get to the bear at first light. And so we text our other buddy who's back at the cabin saying, hey, we kind of found it. Will you come help us get it out? Well, we had kind of planned it this way because the other guy, he was with the training camp with the Colts and with the Broncos. He's 6'3". At the time, I think he was 285 pounds. He could still bench over 500 pounds. So we kind of get a hold of him to come down. That's working smarter, not harder. But Ken's another one of my band of brothers. These are two of my closest friends. My friend Roger, you've heard on the podcast too, about some of our life-threatening stories. Being surrounded by water in a ravine when there was a gully washer comes down through during the night. One time I went blind. I got dehydrated in the mountains. They had to get me to the hospital. But these guys have walked with me when things got bad. So let me ask you a question. What and where are the fears that you're facing right now? The situations that cause fear, they're not just going to go away on their own. You can't wish them away. You have to confront them. You have to walk into them. And I want to encourage you, don't do it alone. You will need backup. If you go into a bad situation blind and unprepared, fear is going to eat you for lunch, guaranteed, just like a bear protecting its kill. As I was finishing this up, I was going back to Joshua. And, you remember Joshua, he's taken over leadership of Israel after Moses dies. He's in an interesting position here. He's stepping into unknown territory. He's leading an entire nation into the promised land. That's what he's supposed to be doing. And that's a place full of enemies, battles, a lot of uncertainty. And God commands Joshua 3 times in the first chapter to be strong and courageous. Joshua wasn't just dealing, with external battles, the things that you could see. His armies or warfare, those are huge things. But he's got a lot of internal battles that can do a lot of damage no one can see and can set the course for what's going to happen in the external battles if you don't get the internal battles right. That stuff no one can see. It's the stuff that every one of us deals with. Worry, doubt, fear. The weight that comes from leadership, whether it be spiritual leadership in our family, at work, church, wherever. But God didn't remove his challenges, but he gives Joshua the promise that says, I will be with you wherever you go. Just like Joshua, we don't get the option to avoid fear. We have to walk into it. And the key is not facing it alone. And the thing is, you don't have to. God's presence, the roar within, is our greatest weapon. Joshua had to trust God's word and move forward in faith, just like we need to know our weapon, which is Scripture, the Word of God, and we need to have a brother walking beside us. Remember this, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's trusting that God is with you through it. So when you look at the word fear, F-E-A-R, we can either look at that and believe it means forget everything and run, or we can choose differently and trust God and face everything and roar. It's time to roar, my friends. See you next time.